Can we just put up the agenda before we agree to change it?
Yeah.
Yes, we do have an outline agenda based on the letter that was sent to the board from the Technical Steering Committee several weeks ago. So this really highlights the main concerns that have been raised by the Technical Steering Committee. These were the points that were put forward in the letter, and we to go through those. And then we had any miscommunications by Intersect and IOG regarding the rollout of this process, discussion of openness and transparency, and then any proposed actions from the outcome of the meeting. Are we happy with that as an agenda?
I mean, I'd like the chance to speak at the start before we as well, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
No objection. So please go ahead, John.
Yeah. So thanks, Kevin. So I think thank you first of all for the opportunity to speak. As a board, we became aware. Well, we've known there'd been issues, but it became more acute last week. And I'm joined here, I think, by Nikhil. Hello, Nikhil and Adam.
Hello.
Two of the board members. I don't know if Steve is here yet or anyone else from our board, but we wanted a chance to come and talk to you. This is a listening session. I want to kind of make it clear that we are here to listen and to talk, but this is not a session where, just for reason of fairness to everybody, we're going to necessarily make any decisions or pronouncements or strong commitments, but we are committing to, consistent with the other boards, other committees we've met, to come back with a plan, a very tactical plan, short-term plan, that we are confident we can deliver upon, and that's something that will come out at the end of the week. I think with these issues, because they're so important, we do need to listen to each of these committees, and your opinions, discuss and then come back with something that as a board we are confident we can deliver upon. I think that in addition to the tactical, there are other changes that we see need to be made in terms of how boards engage with committees as well, to avoid recurrence in future, that we have ideas about, and we'll be sharing those ideas with you. They won't be diktats, they'll be suggestions for consideration, but fundamentally we do want to find a way of working with you more, but at the same time making sure that the executive leadership is not essentially side channeled as a result of this. So there's a balance there. For those of you who've been in management positions in other organizations, it's a little bit akin to skip level, where you kind of talk to the layer below the one you directly interact with to get a good pulse for what's going on. So that's really my opening statement. And before we carry on, maybe you invite Nikhil and Adam to see if there's anything that they would like to also say at this point.
I'll jump in. Thank you, Jer. Thank you, committee members, for having us here. I think Jer summarized it very well. I'd say we've got 2 ears and 1 mouth, intending to use them in that ratio. Nothing more to add on top of what Jer said. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll echo those sentiments. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, speak with you, figure out how we can work together the best way to move forward, and hear what your unique circumstances, unique issues are, but also figure out how they fit into the context of the whole organization and how we can find the right balance to make sure that we address everything as well as we can.
Yeah, so the concerns stem from the recent pivot over the budget process that Intersect has taken. So the Technical Steering Committee put together a list of concerns which was presented to the board. Neil, maybe you'd like to run through those.
Certainly. So the concern, I think we would all agree that we're handling community money, and that basically, when you use something akin to public money, you have to have you're held to a higher standard of fiduciary control and all the rest of it. Okay, and one of the things that was, we took a look at the proposed plans, and we saw that we couldn't see how the normal types of duties that you might be asked to engage in such a process of managing community money, public money, could actually be engaged with in what was being proposed. Right? So that was the first thing. So we did not see how those proposals that were coming up could deal effectively with public money. Right.
So Neil, do you want to go through it all, and then we can go back?
We can come down to each point, right? So, we have concern that the way it's proposed, and that concern has not been alleviated in the last week due to other things we may end up discussing today. That we would end up with a situation where embezzlement and fraud could occur, and there was nothing that we had any contractual relation to do. And I mean, maybe you could say the board will take responsibility, but actually it's all of our reputations that are on the line, at least. And I should imagine remember that one. The whole issue of aligning, maturing, having discussions, moving things through technology readiness levels, etc., etc. Yeah, that's what point 3 is about. How the hell is this stuff going to work together such that you can turn around and create a more stable and take the stable execution we have at the moment into a stable future, right? Again, that the stability was point D as well. What was proposed literally seemed like a free-for-all. If they get voted and the DREPs agree, they get the money with no means of doing anything about that at that point. I think I've covered point A, E as well. How do they count? How do people accountability? Right, and the last point was basically we have seen this as arriving as diktat. We got dictated to last week with respect to something else. We engaged when we started the whole process of trying to put a process together. We asked, we got guidance. We followed that guidance on trying to meet reasonable constraints and controls, and now we find all of that has been taken away from us. And I cannot see how we can have responsibility without the appropriate commensurate authority to act in the community's interests. That was, I think, point 1. Was that a reasonable summary? Does anybody wish to add anything?
Yeah, I'll add something. So if we go back over the process as it was supposed to be, the principles of openness and transparency of the Intersect MBO is that we will build in public and work with the community in order to get to a final result that everybody can agree with in an info action that is voted on as a budget. And the process, as it was ideally supposed to go, did not go that way. In that we weren't able to publicly release drafts as they were iterated in front of the community and have DREPs have involvement in the building of the budgets, which led to a 2-hour Twitter space from Charles Hoskinson declaring that dark things were happening in dark rooms by people who were not being transparent and not open about the process, which led to the pivot. And if we had had the opportunity to actually go and be open and transparent and work in public with the DREPs, we feel that we wouldn't have got to this position of needing to pivot, because that transparency would have been lived up to as the standard that is defined as the standard by Intersect.
Do you mind if I add a point as well? Because I think so. Johnny, I think, was talking about the political side. I think, I was particularly concerned about, I suppose, point D, and just to emphasize, this is a very technical concern, which is namely, we really need to, there's a necessity to treat the technical program of things affecting the core chain. So not things outside the core chain, but the things affecting the core chain, holistically. It's not, we can't, for example, consider Paras and Laos as independent items. They're not. They have a lot of different interactions. And to my mind, one of the key responsibilities of the TSC was to take that perspective, to look at the full program of work and say, well, these may both be sort of very high on the list of community priorities, but we then need to factor into that technical reality of, for example, do these things both have security implications such that the combination is actually going to be problematic? And I would say my at least principal concern with this is that if things are being individually voted on by DREPs and potentially then going to different suppliers, we could end up in a situation where, for example, two suppliers come in having worked on two potentially very good things, and then we're in a position where somebody is going to have to gatekeep and say, well, only one of these can actually come in. Then potentially we have a potential situation we could get into a fork if some part of the community decides they prefer one thing versus the other, and that I don't see how we, on a purely technical level, with DREPs taking decisions on individual contracts and without a centralizing body trying to keep things sensible, I don't see how we resolve that.
Yeah, and just to dovetail off of the back of that, we've moved from a process that would have defined the limitations and the line items of the TSC into a position where proposals are leading the line items, and we haven't got a limitation established on what the costs are going to be and what the needs are. So the needs are being defined by the proposal applications. Yes, there was a roadmap info action, but it is not the same as a clearly defined budget. And that what may happen is things may fall through the cracks because applications did not come in against line items that establish the need. And then we may not have a sustainable or properly developed core network because we may not have had people actually know that they needed to address a specific need. So going to proposal-led development can create issues with budgets, in my opinion, as a voting member.
Ben.
Yeah, I would say for my money, it feels like these actions do pretty significantly devalue Intersect membership, and I'm pretty concerned with that. I would also say it's a bit of a procedural thing where I think we had pictured Intersect as being a customer who would establish sort of their own needs among membership and validate those with DREPs. Like, I don't think there's any objection to involving the DREPs in the process at the final stage. In fact, I would say we needed to work with DREPs a lot earlier, and having tools that allow us to get a temperature check from DREPs has been something I've been asking for months in multiple committees, actually. So I'm glad that we're getting there. But by and large, the ability to establish needs and requirements, there is some negotiation that will need to happen with a vendor that it would be impossible for the DREPs to engage in just by the sheer number of them, and privacy of information with vendors that, like, I'm sure the whole contract isn't going on chain. And then finally, the ability to receive and invigilate work against those contracts. I think those all kind of need to be independent from proposers to a sufficient degree, and I don't see that in this plan. That's all.
Could I just sort of add myself that we're already seeing that the things that we technically believe need to happen are not being covered by the maintenance contract, for example. So there's gaps which we can't fill now, and we are being left. Not that we might have competing things, we might have not have the authority or the budget to spend on something to do that needs that actions to keep the chain running. There are boring things, that we need to do, and they need to be funded. And I think, just to reiterate, the TSC never saw any of its remit outside that of looking after the core of the system. Things that interacted with the core, we don't have that concern, because basically they just interact with Cardano.
Joe, go ahead.
Okay. So what I'd like to do is, can we go back up to the top? I want to go through the items in turn.
Before we do that, does anyone else have anything to add?
My final point. Looking at the list of proposals that are now come through on gov.tools today and yesterday, it's categorized, and there's some that don't have any categorization. But the thing that's interesting is the new pivoted method points to the idea that DREPs are going to go through all of these proposals and give prioritization to what gets contracted. The previous model would have had proposals split between committees and potentially working groups set up underneath those committees in order to get community input as to the viewpoint of them, which would have shared the load between specific audiences, which would have reduced the cognitive overhead on who was making decisions on what contracts they were interested in. Now we have DREPs having responsibility for every proposal that's come through, and to work together as a whole body to come to decisions on each and every proposal, very similar to a Catalyst style, Catalyst 2, as people have told me. That is a lot of cognitive overhead for a very large group of people to work through in a very clear way that I personally don't have confidence in being possible to a very good standard, at least. Certainly you could vote on things and give commentary on things, but I don't know about everything and everybody working on everything. And it was nice that there was going to be a division of labor to help people focus on specific things. And yeah, that's gone now.
Marcus, did you have anything specific to add?
Second, yeah, just I just wrote it in the chat as Johnny mentioned GovTools and to look at it today. Honestly, when I first looked at it this morning, then I wondered if this is just Catalyst. So it's a loose list of things, not even in categories. So like Catalyst has. And I have a hard time to imagine how this should end up in a meaningful way by judge it individually by DREPs. But yeah, back to you. Nothing more to add.
Okay, so Ricky, I see you've raised your hand. You want to hand over to you and then go back to Jer's summary?
Yeah, my point is quite brief. Neil, you mentioned something to do with what we cannot deliver or are not delivering through the support and maintenance contract, and I'm not aware of anything. So I'm, as the person who's currently delivering on this, I would just say I don't really know what you're talking about.
There are items that you excluded in the contract during the negotiations, right? To do with watching things, maintaining certain types of measurements and things like that, which were fine. You said you weren't interested in them, but in the context of a wider budget, the TSC could basically have, TSC could have found small people to fill those things in. We're now in the position, if everything has to go via the chain, I'm saying that we can't even fill in the holes if there are any holes in the maintenance system. Okay.
So what example of support.
So, you know, there were some few specific things, but they point to a more strategic or systematic risk.
Yeah. So one of them that came up, Neil, was that we've been approached by people developing hardware wallets to ask for support. There's currently no support for them. This is not something that IO can do directly, of course. It's not part of the scope of the maintenance contract, but it is 100% necessary for Cardano.
I can't really say there does at least appear to be hardware wallet based proposal in the list of gov tools, so that's lucky. But the point goes back, I think, to the lack of being able to establish a set of very specific and focused line items for people to work to. The established need of the committees or the community or the ecosystem for what needs to be fulfilled, rather than having it be something that emerges out of applications.
Okay.
And then there are several other examples too, Ricky. So another one is the network monitoring system that is currently, the activity is currently performed by the CF, the Cardano Foundation. So they have the tooling and the capability, and then there are additional things too. There's a whole list of things that the maintenance contract with IOG deliberately doesn't cover. Tier 1, Tier 2 support for the network, for example, that was deliberately excluded, but something that Intersect wanted.
Should we go to Jer, start going through the things?
Yeah, so what I'd like to do, if everybody's okay, is to go down to the points. I am not, there's no, I'm trying to understand as opposed to accuse. So first of all, I'm trying to understand precisely what the things are. And that's my approach, and I think Nikhil and Adam as well, because we need to be clear about what the problems are. I know in general terms what you're saying. Some things I know specifically, but because this meeting is important, I want to make sure we come at this with that clarity. I also kind of want to, as a side note, say that I'm sure you've all seen it as well as committees, because of the, let's just say, inconsistent communication. We've all heard things that were half-truths or completely false, like what the board thought, what the TSC is doing, what IOG thinks, and a plethora of other things. I'm making a very clear commitment to work with you more closely to get the budget done, but there is going to have to be some other work on the communication. But my main point is what we talk about and the way we're going to work is going to be written down and shared, and that's the only truth that we're going to be dealing with going forward. Because I understand your frustration. I'm not disagreeing with you in any way, shape, or form. But I'm also not going. I'm going to ignore FUD outside of these forums with you. I'm going to ignore anything outside of what we write down, and that's going to be the way that we work. And I think, should we have done it before? Yes, mea culpa. But I just want to talk about that as a way of working. Neil.
Will that also apply to Charles's pronouncements?
I'm talking about this committee right now.
Okay. The one of the great problems that everybody has is that they've no idea after Charles's pronouncement what's happening, what happens, and what we see is the cause and effect. So this has been, as we have discussed in the past, Jared, this is an ongoing issue that if we are trying to engage in a constructive process together, we need to have, we need to be able to work too. I'm just saying, it sounds great to do it all on paper, but actually I just don't know how to control people's emotions and people's responses to this, because I have seen responses from people changing because Charles has said something, right? So it's one thing to say this thing, it's one thing to actually make it happen. That's one thing. Okay, that's my
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with you. And do I have an answer? No. Do I know it's hard? Yes. Do I believe that that the only way to get this done is by walking the walk and not just talking the talk, by working more closely with you, Neil, and the rest of these committees? Yes. I'm very much committed to my time and efforts, and you know, I've as a member of the board, we're trying to bridge this gap. We're making promises that we're going to deliver upon, and yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it is, at the end of the day, it is hard with the kind of environment that we live in, with personalities, with stakeholders, with you know, different channels of communication to get all of that working perfectly. And that's another thing that the board is going to try and is going to change, and you'll see that happening in due course as well. But yeah, point taken. It's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy, Neil. And just to say simply, you're absolutely right. To write this all down, it's just like that. Boom. There's going to have to be other forms of interactions to keep us from kind of slipping too far apart, and those kind of things too. I agree with you. Is it okay if we go through the items in question, just as clarifying points on those? So where is what's up above? Oh, that's okay. A. Yeah. The proposal does not show how they will deal with public money effectively. So I guess what we're saying there is the proposal being put forward are the value that they're creating in terms of how they're going to address user needs or growth or things like that is ambiguous at best and requires more clarification. Is that a correct assessment or interpretation of that statement? Is that what
You're not quite. I would say it's also to do with a similar level of process and controls that we would see at Catalyst now, like after Daedalus Turbo, or at IOG itself. And it feels like there's a lot less to that process the way it's being developed right now.
So is it more to do with the contractual side, like when let's just say $100,000 is awarded for network monitoring, that there aren't the controls in place to make sure what's delivered at specific milestones is what was expected, or is it more to do
I'd
with
say
that?
it's end to end, but that is a crucial piece.
Okay.
To give more context for the Catalyst evolving over time, the reason I referred to it as Catalyst 2 is that was prior to processes going in place where there was pre-filtering of proposals to see if they matched to like requirements. And we have, because we're not establishing requirements, we're having more of a quote unquote free for all, as it says later on in the points, which could be irresponsible with public money.
Okay. So when you're talking about this one, it's not as much to do with contractual stuff, but that's a part of it. It's more to do with the filtering mechanism at the start, to stop frivolous, potentially frivolous initiatives from being funded.
As Benjamin says, it's kind of both end-to-end and pre-filtering, and also a line item defines what the filter would be, what's needed.
Okay, thank you. So
it might not necessarily be frivolous, Johnny. It could be overblown. It could be inflated. For example, there's no balance to say, for example, that the cost that's being put forward is a sensible one, and there's no real way to evaluate that.
Okay.
I'd like to also point out that there will be several variations here in this. You know, if you are doing something where there is no possibility of competition, right, where we have to use existing engineers for staffing, right, because they have the experience, then I think the duty on us is to be much more open, you know, to control, to be seen to be more vigorous, well, not to be seen, to actually be more vigorous in, you know, how we engage in matching supply and demand, making sure that appropriate people are in place, making sure that we have an ability just a normal fiscal duty of auditing these, that audit can be performed so that we know that the money hasn't been used for other purposes. Okay, I mean that's just a standard use of public money. It's all of the, it's the sort of it's a standard public procurement process that would occur, say, in the UK for a care home and things like this. Nothing complex, nothing big, but we eventually have to justify. I think we collectively and individually have to justify that this amount of money and this amount of output was actually worthwhile, and actually, somebody, how did X buy a new Lamborghini? It wasn't via us type product, right?
So do you see, Neil, that the role of the technical steering committee is it's primarily to advise on the technical feasibility of things and to make sure that what is technically being promised is actually being delivered? That's because I think, when
an initial starting point is what's actually technically being promised. They are competent to deliver.
Right.
Let's start there, right? And I must admit, some of the proposals we have seen, when we ask them to just justify with a whiteboard session, could you show me how you're going to go about this? The answer is either never been delivered to us, or requires a fundamental, like a time machine to make it work, right? It's that sort of level. We're not looking to. I know it, and again, I'm referring to outside influences again. We've talked about gatekeeping and making. We're not trying to. We just want to make sure that actually that it's a likelihood of success in the process that's going to occur. That's right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So can I sorry, I know everybody wants to stick their hands up, but I want to ask just one quick point on that one. So, how do I say it? So let's just say there was a team that was delivering some work on a new form of consensus code, right? The work has been proven that the vendor has a past history of doing the work. The work has been validated by research. It's proposed, Neil, as being something that's necessary for various reasons on the platform. That I would expect the TSC to scrutinize that and say, well, yes, the research is valid, it's technically feasible, it can be done, it's going to benefit the software, the platform, and also to be, and again, I'm just walking through a life cycle here to the earlier point. It's also something that, you should be, I would expect the TSC to be involved in the creation of the contract on the, traditional milestones, and to verify milestone upon milestone that the work that was promised has been delivered to achieve that outcome. And
that actually the risks have been handled, and if there were residual risks, that they've been managed, and if the risks get too big, if it turns out that there's, as you do the development, it becomes infeasible, right? Which is, have to accept that may occur, then you find a soft way of getting out of it, the problem, right? I mean, all of those things are part of a normal contractual development life cycle. I mean, but I think there'll be one other slightly, and that's perhaps a complication here, because Cardano is a soft real-time system, right? It might technically work if you had infinite time, but you can't fit it in the time budget. So this is, these would be one of the technical reasons that people might not be able to do this. All of that would be done in an open and free and frank way, so that people can see that we're doing it without fear or favor, right? But the ground truth that we're trying to maintain is a healthy operating environment for the Cardano ecosystem, for the Cardano core.
Yeah, I mean, I take those points on board, and I agree that those situations can occur. But at a fundamental level, I do see the TSC as a group that would essentially be the only people who can say this crypto. I'm not an expert on this kind of domain, but this crypto primitive or that use case or whatever it is has been delivered according to the specification, and would be the one to say it's done now. You can release the payment, for example. Would that be fair?
Yes. And I think we would make sure that for example, I was the week before last in Paris, and this week I'm in Edinburgh, Paris and Laos, right?
Yeah.
Okay, and you find things in those meetings that you want to. I mean, technically the work is done beautifully, right? There's no reason why it shouldn't be signed off, but now there are serious questions of how do we move forward that have to be put in front of the community because they have cost implications, right? So I'm just saying, just because we're concerned that there are real world gating conditions that someone needs to help work with people to get through the gates. The idea that once you fire the starting gun, all they have to do is produce the pieces of paper, right? And they'll get the money, is the thing that we come back to Daedalus Turbo. That's exactly what went wrong there, okay? So I'm not and it sounds, I realize it sounds that we're trying to force things that potentially be arrogant, but this is, with a bit of luck, this is not any individual. It is, on this body you have all the people with the TSC has all of the people who actually designed and built the system and understood it from day one. Except most. Would you accept most, Nick? Yeah. Okay. Right. Many. Okay. Some. Okay. But enough to turn around and keep the sanity prevailing. Right. Okay. I'm just saying that's what I see as the important part of the role. Now, if someone comes along and says, "I'm going to do this," it's infinitely scalable, and I can do things instantaneously, right? And they can't even write on a whiteboard what that means. Guess what? They failed the first gate.
I'm just going to clarify cost implications. I believe you mean, Neil, that cost implications to the SPOs running the infrastructure.
Oh yeah, the systemic cost.
Which is why it would need to be socialized with the people who were affected by it, because they would have additional bandwidth costs or hardware requirements as a result of these upgrades, which when presented it publicly by people who are trying to sell the new items aren't mentioned as knock-on effects of actually implementing these features.
We know that Laos is going to have a higher delay than Peras, for example, right? That's not socialized at the present.
Sorry, which one? Sorry, Neil?
We know the time to get from submission to getting onto to the final block in Laos will be longer than we currently have in Peras.
Right, okay. Yeah.
Right? Now, sorry. Well, so not Peras, I meant Preos. Thank you. Yes, thank you, Kevin. I've had, you know me in language. Everybody's talked about how much faster it's going to go. Nobody has said, well, that's what the community will. That is a penalty you will have to bear if you want to have this speed, right? Right.
Okay. Yeah.
So actually, I think part of the TSC's duty is one of candor. Right.
I agree with you. I think it is, everything you say, let's say for an example, a proposal comes in and you say, don't recommend that this goes forward because it's not feasible and there's other work needs to be done in advance before you can even decide. That's perfectly fair.
And that's discovering the things. The point is, I see discovery, understanding, and sometimes even doing things that you may know you have a reasonable probability they're not going to work, but you're going to find interesting things on the journey getting there. All of those are valid, right?
I think, Neil, we're agreeing with each other.
Good.
Right.
There are other hands, and I'm sorry.
If that's agreement, I'm sorry. I know that I'm conscious of time here, and there are a number of points here. Have we summarized this a bit more succinctly in terms of showing how they'll deal with public money effectively? I don't know if we want to move on to some of the other points.
I think we need a second meeting, I'm afraid, because there's other stuff here, and the points are very valid. I don't want to rush it. It depends on the TSC, but I would request a second meeting with you, if possible, please. But I don't want to rush these things. I want to go through them point by point, and I want to go through the other ones as well. So let's see where we get today. This is a request from me to you. If you're willing to accept that, I would really like a second call as well.
I think that's quite reasonable. We don't want to rush anything.
No.
We need to go through the points.
But I also want to get this done. I want to get my other request. I'm people who know me may think I'm slightly pushy, but I would like to get this done in a timely manner because we need to also move on with the plan for all of us that we're happy with on this. So let's keep, if it's okay with everybody, let's keep going.
Not sure if it is my turn now to say something, but if yes, then
I think Kevin is the chair. It's up to him.
Yes, go ahead, Marcus.
what I wanted to add when Neil or you and Neil had a conversation before, in my opinion, it is also that now in this, let's say, new way of doing things after IOG did things like many years, there are proposals that come in with things they would like to do. So like to do because there is some, they believe that their solution is the best solution for this. But yeah, they would also make some money and make a margin, a profit from it. Usually, and this is a very common human behavior, you try to, or you like things that you, or you propose things that you like to do, and you try to keep out a little bit the nasty things that maybe are difficult or even impossible or costly to do. I understood the technical steering committee's roles also as an entity who is questioning this. First, technically capable to identify such missing parts, or yes, good proposal, but also please, it requires A, Y, something like this. And this is then like not a filtering or a gatewaying or a refusing a proposal, but a question, a request back to improve it and demanding a full solution and not just the, let's say, profitable or the thing someone likes to do. It's Gerard, it's very much the same. I'm fully sure that you have to do this on your table every day. If some researcher or some lead in all of your teams comes to you and wants to do something, then he will always come up first with the nice things, with the cool things that someone wants to do. And then you say, yes, sounds cool, but you need to be careful. This also needs to, and so on.
So if I can paraphrase, you know, it's the total solution that you're talking about there, and you know, people pick and choose certain bits of that solution, and you think the TSC should point out where there's gaps in things that also need to be done. Yeah, I think that's fair, and to go back for more, to request more clarifying information. I mean, with also to Neil's points about like the whiteboard or some proof point or some justification of for why.
It has many flavors. I brought up the cost or the, let's say, profitability point, but it's also like technically feasible or time-wise resources, are they available? Is it realistic? A simplified form, you can see it in the parameters. So the Ouroboros parameter settings, there will always be someone who comes up with a proposal to change a simple value. Let's double K. Okay, sounds good. And this one proposer has clearly some goals or idea what he wants to do. And then he comes up with just that simple proposal. The parameter committee is then here and says, yeah, but look, there are some implications. This formula is very complex and there are very much many relations. So there needs to be some counterpart, not taking down the request to increase K, but to bring up to bring up the topic. We can increase K, but this has some effects. This has some implications. We may also need to change this or this or this.
Yeah, but yeah, sorry, but when to Neil's point, like there's some things sometimes that you start to do, you don't know all the things, but you need to try it and it doesn't work, or it stops at a certain point where it doesn't make sense. You know, you can, you know, with complicated things, the one thing I have been made aware of in Cardano, that there are things that you have to try out, but you've got to see where you get to sometimes with development and some testing, and it doesn't actually make sense. Then but you still have to try to do something sometimes when you don't always know. But you might cut some things off a little bit early. I don't know if that's exactly what you said, Neil,
So,
but
well, what I'm trying to say is, I ran research institutes, right? I've been involved for years. You engage in some of these things. You accept that you identify the risks and you do the difficult things first, right?
Yeah.
Because what you're trying to do, there's two things here. One is it's not necessarily to succeed, or success. You redefine success. One is to turn around and deliver the end thing, but the other to deliver good things. But the other thing is to prune things that don't work early. Okay.
Yeah, okay, yeah, exactly. I think you said it more better than me. Kevin, I think there's other people who
Adam R, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. So I do want to just sort of back up for a minute and take like a broad overview of what I've been hearing from you guys, what I saw in your letter, as well as trying to sort of balance it against some of the other community concerns. So part of the reason why there was this pivot to the new process was because not in your budget, but in some budgets that were being proposed, there was large amounts of unallocated funds that were going to be for proposals that would be to be determined later. And there were some community members that were concerned that this would be Intersect basically making decisions that were too big and become like sort of a kingmaker in Cardano. I had heard that from others. There's also the fact, but I recognize that what you guys are saying, that you guys as the technical subject matter experts need to be in charge of your budget. And I recognize what you're saying, that you wanted to be more proactive about seeking input from the DREPs sooner. But it does seem like you're willing to have like a discovery period where early on the process, you involve the community, you have this discovery period where you talk to people, you get people to put forward proposals, you build what you think is a good budget based on what you've been hearing and what you know is needed. Most of these, hopefully most of these, in my opinion, would be like identified as who will be working on them. Some of them might be unallocated. You might say, we know this is a prerogative. We do not yet have someone in mind, but it is something that we want to have funds allocated for in the budget. And then you want to do this all in consultation with the DREPs so that when you put forward your final budget, it can be something that will pass. Am I on the right track here? Is this kind of the broad overview, and we can fill in the details as we go here?
Am I overjumping as secretary to just say, Adam, that was that what you've described there is largely the process that we had in place. We had been running since November last year, an open forum for anyone to submit proposals that may or may not be core. We got a lot that weren't core, so we tried to push them into the right place to get. But we had discussion on those across many committees. I think the bits that you've described that, as you said before, didn't happen as it should have done was the consultation with the DREPs. But it is unfortunate we had a number of calls scheduled the week after the pivot. So we've ended up in this place. But
yeah, to again dovetail off the back of that, we were sort of managed in the release schedule of our draft budget to go to this. Everybody gets released at once with a 6-week consultation period with the DREPs, which made them feel disenfranchised about not being part of the actual building process. We were not building in public, as the term goes. Rather that people felt they were dictated to about what was requested by, instead of collaborating with the Intersect committees. And this is something that even during the process, voting seat members of the technical steering committee were, I would say, mocking in my case, and in other cases, just stating that it wouldn't be a great idea to actually collaborate with the DREPs on what we're going to propose, rather than give them a final thing. And then that led to the pivot, and the pivot is changing it so the proposals for actual work lead to the line items rather than a collaboration of the establishment of the line items and limit. And to your point, Adam, I think if we had have openly collaborated with the DREPs, we wouldn't have got to a position where there was a proposal of line items with very high limits of spend, because they would have been able to curb that early on in the collaborative process. Like, you can't have that much, and why do you want this line item?
Yeah, exactly. So what we were looking for was precisely the interaction with the DREPs, and we were following exactly the processes that Intersect laid down, which were then very rapidly changed.
And openly criticised in a PR Twitter space by Charles Hoskins. The irony of following our limitations that we were against. Charles and I fundamentally agree, or Charles and potentially the TSC as a whole, but definitely Charles and I fundamentally agree that it wasn't open from the perspective of the community, because they didn't get to see it until it was put on a Cardano forum, fully complete, ready to discuss for 6 weeks.
Should we move on?
Did Ricky have a point there? Ricky, you put up your hand. I don't know if you spoke.
I did. I just wanted to say that I'm listening to the various issues, and there doesn't seem to be anything to me that Intersect and the TSC cannot resolve by putting in place the appropriate contracts with the vendors. I mean, the proposal is for DREPs to vote on these projects, for the projects for them to be available to work with an administrator and some sort of oversight. But those contracts between Intersect and the vendor determines what work gets done and what the milestones are. So you can put in place all the provisions that you need to make sure that those projects are delivered appropriately, with the right milestones, with the right dependency on other projects. You can put all those things into the contract, and there's nothing stopping you do that. I mean, I've been working on the smart contract that's going to propose to handle this. There's nothing stopping you doing that with that smart contract. So it's the right thing. It's what you should be doing as a TSC, as Intersect, I believe.
I mean, it seems a little bit. My only concern there is that if the wider message that's being said is is the TSC doesn't have the authority to say decline things, the TSC shouldn't be, and it sounds like to an extent so if something comes in, for example, that we just generally think doesn't make any sense or is going to conflict, yes, we could craft a contract but that contract would, in a sense, be subverting the will of the DREPs, which feels like a worse situation to be in than a situation where we actively say at the start, hey, this might be something that everyone particularly wants, but for this and this reason, it's not going to make sense to do that. So it doesn't feel like that's a better solution.
I'm not going to pronounce any judgment on whether it's better or not. There's a new proposal, and I just think that proposal is workable if Intersect build the correct contracts. I mean, there has to be a real world entity on the seller side, which is Intersect, and the vendor, between them and the vendor. And as long as those agreements are crafted correctly, and there is where the TSC can put their technical knowledge into it, okay, then I think everything's possible. That's all I'm trying to say. I don't think
I would agree with Nick that basically this is a recipe for even worse disaster, right? The answer is, I don't have a problem with the very end point where you've got an agreed set of things that we believe are executable, then you create a contract for them. But before you believe they're executable, what are you creating a contract for? Just to create conflict. That would be my. I mean,
well, I would imagine
that would be my starting point, Ricky.
I would imagine you wouldn't create for a project that is.
But we're giving the funds have been allocated. The DREPs have voted, right? Right now we are in the problem that actually any conflict. How do we resolve conflict?
Yeah,
because you have a contract in place, right?
Well,
the item is correct, but the proposer can't carry out the work.
Well, that's a bit presumptuous, isn't it? How do you know they can't carry out the work until they fail to deliver?
I think
Ricky, because because when you do a little bit of analysis, they tell you that if you take a feather and a piece of lead, it'll weigh less than the feather. I see this. I've seen this inside IOG, right? And you say, guys, that's not feasible, right?
I think we don't need to be so extreme in this. I mean, the example, say, an example might not use, say somebody proposes, like adding a particular, new feature that looks good, but for example, the way it's specified would increase the size of the header, and we know that the size of the header is something that we need to keep down. And say we know that there's some other work going on that's already in progress that also adds something into the header. So we're basically butting up against a hard limit. Now, the way we would deal with that at the moment is we would say, okay, we have these two items basically as they're written right now. We can't do them. We could turn one of them into a bit of research work that basically goes and says, could you do this in a different way? Yeah, that's possible. Or we can go back to the community and say, look, we know you want both these things, that it's not actually going to be possible. The concern in this situation was, say, especially if things are being done item by item, and that first item is already going, which is concern. Second item comes in and gets voted on. Now we do have the option, probably our best option at that point would be to craft the contract that says, go away and do some evaluation on this. But my concern would be if the community has said, hey, go, somebody has proposed we can go and implement this, and the community has said via DREPs, yes, we would absolutely love that, then the TSC then rewriting that contract to say, actually go ahead and do some evaluation about how you can do this in a different way may not be perceived so well, because it would be seen as effectively subverting the decision by the DREPs. Whereas in the current process, I would say we would take both of those items at the start, try to explain, clarify why they conflict, and then present ways that go forward without something being promised that we then have to try to wind back on. Would be, I don't think we need any.
Sorry to interject here, but I need to leave in 1 minute. I'm sorry, but I do want to arrange a follow-up meeting. I apologize about this, but I'm back to back, unfortunately. This conversation has been good. So
the meeting should close then.
No, I mean, it's Kevin. It's a request to you as a chair for a follow-up meeting is what I'm asking for.
So let's take a vote. Does who agrees to a follow-up meeting?
And my commitment to
not agree. No. Okay, great. So we'll organise the following meeting.
What I'd like to propose, Kevin, I'm going to give you 2 slots this week, and I'll give you 6 slots next week when I'm available, and just pick one of those that works for you and the rest of this committee. As I say, I'll be happy to join. I know it's difficult, my time and your time getting coordinating it. So if I give you all these slots, hopefully one of them will work for you. Is that okay, Kevin?
Yes, absolutely. Okay.
And look, I agree with. I think there's nothing here that you've said that I don't disagree with. There's some nuances. So I think the gaps between us in terms of certain things are much smaller, and actually they're a lot different to what I heard in the FUD. So I'm really pleased with that. But I want to go through the rest of them with you, and I still going to commit to, even though we won't necessarily have at our full meeting on all the items by the end of the week, the board will be producing some sort of a plan by Friday, even if it's going to be modest, but we will be doing that.
Yeah, the objective is to get to a fair, effective, and workable process.
Yeah, it's a practical solution that will get us to deliver a budget that has a lot of the consideration that you have in mind, but within the time constraints that we have, because we do have those to consider as well. But yeah, I agree. So that's it. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you to the members of the committee for the time.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, to the board for joining us today.
Yes, thank you.
He's away.
So I'd suggest, shall we close this meeting? We'll we'll follow up with Jer and any other board members in subsequent sessions, so we can run through the rest of the points. Does anyone have anything quick they want to add?
Yeah. Just for the sake of a potentially YouTube published recording, the final point that dovetails again off the back of what was said earlier is with the proposal pivot method we've done now, where proposals come in first, D-reps vote on them based on prioritization and popularity. We get to a point where Intersect has said that they reserve the right higher up from the committees themselves to refuse a contract because of a concern with it. So we're setting up a scenario whereby the D-reps can feel disenfranchised for having a very popular proposal knocked back by Intersect, rather than having Intersect have authority from the get-go, and therefore the expectation is set that they may have commentary and make decisions to change contracts. We're advertising a false reality at the moment. Having the D-reps be the ultimate decider is not what is practically going to happen.
Yeah, I have similar input. It feels like there's a bit of I think the rub is we're trying to figure out if the D-reps are capable of obligating Intersect to look after something that maybe Intersect had no input on in any way, shape, or form, an independent proposal that cites Intersect as an invigilator without our knowledge or consent. As opposed to I certainly think an infeasible proposal could also come up. I just think that first situation I mentioned is probably more likely.
Okay, so thanks everyone. We'll reconvene with the board at a time to be agreed.
All right, thanks everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.